call us to order anytime.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and call this to order. I'm Bo Revelet, chair of the Advocacy Committee. It's great to see some new faces here. And we'll get started by just going around doing introductions. So just share your name and what agency you're with. So I'm Bo with White Tenants and the HPI Board.
I'm Janice James. I'm with the HPI Board, and I'm retired from the Hope Center.
Marty Jones, Community Action Council.
I'm Bruce Davis. Hey Jeff, is it officially now Continuum of Care Board rather than HPI Board?
It's dual. It's both. Both are correct. We are the HPI board. We are the Continuum of
That's
Care
what I
Board.
thought. Okay, I'm Bruce Davis with the HPI Continuum of Care Board.
I'm Erica Dominguez with the Lexington Rescue Mission.
Stephanie Martinez with the Nathaniel Mission.
I'm Naomi Cluett with the Lexington Public Library.
Ryan Geider with Independence Police.
Dylan Nichols with Independence Police.
Sierra Potter with Independence Police.
And Eric Evans, Housing Advocate with Independence Police.
Amber Cronin, Hope Center.
I'm Jeff Herron, manager of LFUCG's Office of Homelessness Prevention and Intervention.
Hi, Joy Andrade. I'm on the HPI board.
I'm Bee Mead. I am the HMIS data specialist with the Office of Homelessness Prevention and Intervention.
Kitty Collins with Mount Comprehensive Care.
Dale Chapman, St. Michael's Episcopal Church.
And then we've got a few folks around the perimeter.
I'm Bill Polly with KEJC.
I'm Sammy Garfield. I'm at Kentucky Refugee Ministries.
Jamie Cody with Rescue Navigators.
Lindsay Fowle is Step by Step. Catherine Wallingford with Good Shepherd Episcopal Church.
Thank you everyone who's here today, especially those who are maybe new to us. We're going to do a quick approval of the minutes for our February 28th meeting. And then the bulk of today's meeting is going to be kind of an open house format. I did put together a presentation to kind of frame that conversation. What I wanted to do was hold a meeting that was accessible, that gave people a little bit more information about what we do. For example, if someone's interested in being more involved or in joining as a new member, what committees might they potentially be interested in? Where should they target those efforts? And then engage in some conversation to see if people might have some additional suggestions or ideals of things that we can be incorporating into our strategies, as well as leaving some space for some open questions and conversation. So I'll go ahead and just ask if there are any corrections or revisions to the minutes for the February 28th meeting. Hearing none, would there be a motion to approve? This would be a full membership vote.
I move to approve the February 28th minutes of this committee.
Thank you, Bruce. Is there a second?
I second.
Any further discussion? All right. All those in favor? All those opposed? All right, that motion passes.
One quick correction. In the mission of committee, it says Lexington Fayette Continuum of Care, and then in parentheses it says COCA.
Thank you. I will adjust that. All right, so now we'll get into the meat and bones of this particular meeting. Again, wanted to kind of create something that would help us to kind of understand our role within the community and some of the work that we're doing specifically to carry out that role. I also find that it's something that sometimes even our existing members have some questions about how things operate. So this might be helpful just as much for returning members as it is for folks that are new to us. So just starting with a basic definition of a continuum of care. So basically, this is going to be a community-wide commitment with the goal of ending homelessness. Some of the things that would be included as part of that goal, we provide funding to nonprofit organizations to help implement work. We would have a goal of trying to quickly rehouse individuals and families as they experience homelessness, to reduce the trauma and dislocation that is caused when people experience homelessness. We also want to operate a system that is fair and equitable, that promotes access to resources in an effective way, and that ultimately moves persons towards self-sufficiency. Another way of framing this in a slightly more specific manner would be that this is our community's specific plan and system that's designated to meet the needs of persons who are experiencing homelessness. And what that's going to entail is that we are not only meeting the immediate need of shelter, but also moving people into permanent housing, that we are offering opportunities for supportive services, connecting people with things like opportunities for education and employment, that we are promoting access to mainstream benefit programs that can be a part of that plan for self-sufficiency and sustaining housing over time, but also that we should be focused on prevention strategies. How do we divert persons from entering our system altogether as a way of reducing our overall numbers and keeping people from experiencing that traumatic experience of homelessness? So who should be a part of the continuum of care? This can be something extremely broad. Most of the time, we're going to see a lot of familiar faces in these meetings, and that's going to be usually our core organizations that focus on homelessness or broader issues like poverty. But there's many organizations and individuals who are welcome at the table. Essentially, anyone who has a stake in ending homelessness can and should be a part of this conversation. Homelessness is a community problem and requires a community solution. Some examples, we're going to have victim services providers like Greenhouse 17, faith-based organizations, obviously LFUCG as the local government serves as the lead agency for the continuum of care. Businesses can be a part of the continuum of care. Many in this room are going to identify as advocates. We have private citizens that aren't necessarily attached with an organization who have formally joined or who informally participate. Whoa, going to need to definitely stand back. LHA is our local public housing agency and is involved in many of the conversations and work that we do. We have representation from the public school system. T.C. Johnson with the McKinney-Vento office sits on our board and helps make sure that we consider not just those experiencing literal homelessness, but those who also meet the Department of Education's definition. We have many social service providers who might operate a little bit on the periphery of homelessness itself. Maybe their core mission is serving individuals with serious mental illness or those that have disabling conditions, but they understand the intersectionality of homelessness and are part of our conversations. We have several mental health care agencies like New Vista and Mountain Comprehensive Care Center that participate. We have hospitals that we often engage. Probably UK Healthcare is the one who's most involved in the continuum. Universities, we get a lot of support from universities in terms of things like operating our annual point in time count, and from time to time we partner with universities to conduct research or other efforts. Affordable housing developers, it's definitely somebody that we could use a little bit more of at the table, as I think all of us doing this work understand that a lot of the challenges we face come down to housing itself and the access to affordable housing in our community. Law enforcement also oftentimes works with us, and as such are formal members of the continuum of care. We have veteran service providers serving individuals who are currently or formerly experiencing homelessness, and individuals themselves that have lived experience. We encourage and promote being a part of our work. Again, this would be really essentially anyone who has a stake in trying to prevent and end homelessness within our community. And we always want to make sure that there's diverse representation on certain subpopulations. We want youth providers. We want victim services or DV providers. We want to have those that are working with veterans, those working with individuals with substance use. We want to have as wide and broad of representation as we possibly can to make sure that we have solutions that are varied and broad. Several years ago, we engaged with Untold Content, a marketing team, to help us develop a continuum of care brand. Sometimes it is difficult to get people to see the efforts of the continuum as more than maybe oftentimes being framed as what the city is doing. And this is a conscious effort to make sure that we're focusing on the broader continuum and not just specifically my office. In part of that, we developed some clear mission statements and vision statements and values. Our mission, simply put, is to ensure that everyone in Lexington has access to housing by building a coordinated strategy that brings hope and stability to all. I've underlined coordinated strategy because coordination is key to what we do, and it is the role of this office and the continuum to provide coordination and support to facilitate the programming and strategies that are needed to address homelessness. In terms of vision, we define that as being that everyone in Lexington should have a safe, stable home and the support that they need to thrive. As we are engaging in leadership and development of the LEH brand, it was important for us that we chose language that focused not just on meeting people's basic needs, but also looking at how we can help people to achieve self-sufficiency, to recover from the trauma of homelessness, and to truly thrive, not just survive. Moving into the values of the continuum of care, some of the cornerstones that we try to work by, we believe that at its core, homelessness is the solution to housing. We mentioned several times now the intersectionality of homelessness. We know that it touches many different other issues that people face that can be a part of their personal journey and how they might have arrived at a homeless situation, but those are not always necessarily the cause. At its core, homelessness is about people having a lack of access to affordable housing and a lack of supports who can help them when they experience crisis. We also believe in effectiveness. We want to develop a strategy that incorporates best practices that are implemented in the most effective way, and the way that we're able to gauge that is through examination of data. We have made a conscious effort to do things not only to collect and analyze data, but to message it to the public, to make it very forward-facing so that we can highlight the work that we're doing and the work that's still needed to be done. Some of our additional core beliefs are tied to our adoption and promotion of the Housing First model. Many of you are going to be familiar with that, but since we do have some new persons in the room, just wanting to review, this would include that persons should not have to demonstrate readiness for housing. Permanent housing should be the goal for all persons, regardless of where they are in their journey. A lot of what systems like ours have done in the past was required that people went through a step process, that first persons would have to go to emergency shelter, then they could graduate to transitional housing, then they could graduate to permanent housing. Sometimes we have to consider that there's not one linear path. It may not serve a particular individual well to be in an emergency shelter environment if that is not something that is going to be a good fit for where they are at that time. We also have to acknowledge that when we have programming like transitional housing, we have to have somewhere to transition folks to. So be mindful of some of these challenges. We're really looking to move people to permanent housing as quickly as possible. Most issues that we would want to try to work with individuals or families to improve are going to be most improved through the provision of safe and stable housing. Also, there should be self-determination and client choice. I think most of us in this room acknowledge the fact that any change that someone wants to make is going to be much more impactful and much more successful if they choose it for themselves. When we develop a housing plan, when we develop a case management plan, we should be focusing on what the client wants to work on, what the individual is interested in, not what we as a provider are interested in necessarily. And as much as possible, we should be trying to incorporate the voice of that client into that plan and make sure that if it no longer works for them, then we adjust that plan so that it does meet their needs. We operate with a recovery orientation. understanding that homelessness itself is traumatic, but so are a variety of other issues that people experiencing homelessness face. It may be difficult at times to see immediate progress in someone's situation, and we have to acknowledge the impact of trauma, how that can zap someone of their motivation, how it can produce barriers for them getting to their goals. And we have to actively work to try to promote a healthy environment for them and be the supports that can help them to recover. We also believe in individualized and client-driven supports, again, maximizing individual choice and making sure that individuals are able to get support in the things that they need, but are not necessarily guided to the particular answers that we want for them. And finally, we believe that there should be a social and community-oriented approach to homelessness. As a very small staff that just expanded to a staff of three of us sitting in a government building are not going to solve homelessness in Lexington. It takes all of you around this table, and to be honest, we need to pack this room with more people before we're going to actually achieve that goal. So we really want to maximize and highlight the fact that everyone has a role in the work that we do. I'm going to just briefly kind of overview some of who is part of the continuum. This is our current board. So we have, I'm just going to go ahead and call up our board members who are with us today. Obviously we did introductions, but we have Bo, the chair of this committee, Janice James, formerly with the Hope Center, Bruce Davis, Kathy Ploman with the Urban County Council. Am I missing anybody? No, I don't think so. And we just filled our last Joy, right here in front of you. Joy Andrade. We are really excited to have somebody who actually likes to deal with data and helps with our data and systems integration committee. And we recently just filled our last vacancy with a new individual who would join us at the next board meeting with her for orientation next week. Billy Love is a licensed clinical social worker who has a background in working with individuals specifically that have experienced trauma. And so we're really excited to have her expertise and her input on our board. Briefly, just kind of capturing some of the many organizations who are part of the continuum of care. This kind of goes back to that slide of who should be a part of the continuum, and you're going to see a lot of those categories represented by the logos on this slide. So next, I want to spend a little bit of time talking through what the work of each of our committees does and how it relates to the work of the board itself. This is probably the area that I get a lot of questions as someone is contemplating whether they want to be a formal member of the continuum of care. They often have questions around, okay, you have all these meetings, all these committees, which one should my organization or me as an individual, who should be at the table for which meetings? So first, just outlining the three committees that we do have. Those are where the bulk of the work is going to be done, and then we're going to bring items back to our board for formal votes and to move things forward. But we really need the voice and the support of our membership to break out into areas that can help us develop our strategies and our work. So on the first Wednesday of every other month, we have our Data and Systems Integration Committee. On the third Wednesday of every other month, we have Program Performance and Evaluation Committee. And then we would have on the fourth Wednesday of every other month, the Advocacy Issues and Programs Committee. All of those committees are going to meet in the every other month starting with February. And then starting in January, we have board meetings that take place on the second Wednesday of every other month. So that's where having a handy dandy calendar can come in handy, because it is a little bit daunting at first to track all of that movement and know when and where to be. From year to year, sometimes we have meetings that we have to change our venue. Something might be booked well in advance. So having something like that to reference is extremely helpful. We're going to go into what each of those committees does in more detail. So the Data and Systems Integration Committee was formerly our HMIS, or Coordinated Entry Committee. It still deals a lot with those items. HMIS being the Homeless Management Information System, or the database that we are federally mandated to use. It helps us to track information about individuals and services within our system. It's going to be our primary source for evaluating things like system gaps, effectiveness of programming. And then our coordinated entry system is going to be the mechanism or system that helps us to outreach persons, engage them in a common assessment tool, understand their needs, and link them to the right levels of housing and supportive services. So in addition to evaluating data and our system performance, that's where we're also trying to constantly think about how we can more effectively work with other systems to create a more integrated and unified overall community. The Program Performance and Evaluation Committee is going to be made up of board members who have a neutral role where they are not directly employed by an organization or serving on the board of an organization. They can help us to make our funding decisions when we have funds that are available. They also are going to hold presentations of any programming that receives funds specifically to address homelessness from the city. And so that process allows us to establish and monitor performance targets. We can look at individual programs, understand how they are performing when we have funds available in the future, knowing whether certain types of programs are worth us funding again in the future, knowing what organizations are able to execute certain work. And that is something that also helps lead to conversations when we maybe don't meet a performance measure. What are the factors involved? Is this something at the programmatic level? Does the failure to reach an outcome mean that maybe there was a period where there was a gap in staffing? Or does the failure for us to meet that outcome measure really speak to more of a systematic issue? Is this something that other programs are facing and something that we need to try to develop community-wide solutions for? The Advocacy Issues and Programs Committee, got me again, focuses on identifying system gaps or potentially taking potential gaps that are identified by our Program Performance and Evaluation Committee and moving those forward, doing more investigation, researching strategies or best practices, program models to address those gaps, doing the work to develop those solutions. That can include establishing funding priorities, determining what specific things that we want to put our funding behind in order to meet our goals, and developing our overall COC strategies. That committee is going to focus on advocacy efforts that might be advocating against something like House Bill 5, that might be just raising general awareness within the community so that we can gain the support of those that we need it from. It could be our elected officials, or it could be individuals who might be able to help us tackle a particular issue that we're seeing. And then, because it still maybe be a little bit fuzzy, we're also just going to make some brief recommendations of types of people that might want to attend those individual committees. So Data and Systems Integration is probably one of the committees that we sometimes struggle to get a lot of engagement in because some people don't like the word data. It makes them a little uncomfortable. But what we really attempt to do in that committee is present data in a way that is hopefully accessible and understandable, and that can inform our work and our decisions. So definitely, if you have an interest or a background in data, it might be not only of interest to you, but you might be a helpful part of those conversations. It might be a good idea for folks that have a tie to other systems, like the healthcare system, to be a part of those conversations. Going back to the fact that this ties to how we operate our coordinated entry system, if there's somebody that can help us to better assess needs, to better gauge the acuity of needs, we want to have that conversation. Also, we would want folks who are members of leadership within organizations or systems that can help us to actually implement policies and practices or improve upon them to be a part of those conversations. For the Program Performance and Evaluation Committee, that's going to be a committee that would be probably ideal for program level staff. A lot of times when we're talking through how programs perform on our performance metrics, there can be a lot of useful conversations that are generated out of that. Maybe we are talking about whether or not a program met its income growth measure, and maybe that's something that helps share resources between frontline staff that can be used in working with a variety of different clients or programs. It would also be a good committee for somebody who's maybe just interested in knowing more about kind of the frontline programs that we have and the work that they're doing. The Advocacy Issues and Programs Committee would be recommended for those that have an interest in engaging in advocacy efforts, but also for those who might be wanting to bring a particular issue to our attention for the COC to work on developing solutions to address. But also members that have experience with development or implementation of programs and policies who can help us, once we've identified those gaps, to fill them. This slide's going to be kind of hard to read at this size, but it is an attempt to give you a breakdown of the annual COC timeline. This timeline is going to be specifically tied to our role as the collaborative applicant who develops our annual application for the Continuum of Care program. In the first quarter, we're going to have things, and this is on a calendar year. This is where we really start the process of planning for the year. We're going to go ahead and register with HUD for our intent to submit a new application this year, and then we're going to begin the work of building that application. It's going to start with efforts to take stock of our available inventory of beds. That includes emergency shelter, transitional housing, permanent housing. And we're also going to do at the same time our annual point in time count. While that is a static measure, it's looking at one fixed night. It's not going to be something that is dynamic enough to tell us about fluctuations in homelessness across the entire year. It is something that helps us make longitudinal comparisons or comparisons to other communities. It's a good opportunity for us to gauge progress, understand what the needs of our population are at this given moment. Then next, we're going to move into some other data sets in the spring, like our system performance measures. We just reported out in the Data and Systems Integration Committee on some of the outcomes from our most recent submission. And then moving towards late spring, early summer, we are going to see the Continuum of Care process open up. HUD will release the Notice of Funding Opportunity that's going to tell us what HUD's current priorities are, how we're going to be evaluated as a community so that we can begin building an application that is as strong as possible, that helps us to bring funding into the community. Usually we're going to open that competition progress in late summer, early fall. The NOFA is usually going to drop around June or July. We are going to run an internal competition for our providers to apply for funding to directly operate programs. And then we are going to include funding recommendations of who we think should receive that funding and at what levels in an overall community application that frames that. And that's going to talk to our broader community strategies to preventing and ending homelessness. Then we're going to kind of close out the year by doing our final data submission to HUD, the longitudinal systems analysis. That is going to be something where we have the point in time count, which looks at one fixed night. The longitudinal systems analysis looks at our data throughout the entire year, and it helps us better understand things like the pathways that people take when they access our system. Are they entering from the streets? Are they entering through shelter? What resources are they touching along the way? What are the outcomes? And then we're also going to get towards the end of the year, beginning of the next year, the results of our Continuum of Care application and understand at what level that our community was funded. So one of the things that I really want to make sure that we have new persons at the table for is going to be for continuing to develop our strategies. The key strategies that we are tasked with reporting on each year and that really guide our work throughout each year are going to be our strategies to reduce the number of persons that experience first-time homelessness. We can't necessarily always predict a strategy that's going to reduce our overall numbers of homelessness. We have to kind of break it down and look at different areas. One thing is, how do we prevent people from ever experiencing homelessness? We want to examine the number of persons that we're seeing within our system who haven't previously accessed shelter or programs, and how can we identify risk factors and develop solutions. We are looking to reduce the amount of time that persons experience homelessness when they do experience it. How can we make it so that they have a more rapid recovery and return to permanent housing? We want to make sure that our programs are as effective as possible at increasing our permanent housing exits. We want to see that when people leave our housing programs, that ideally it is to continue residing in permanent housing and not to exit to negative destinations like the streets, shelter. We want to move people forward, not backward. Additionally, we want to make sure that when folks do exit, and it's to a positive destination, that they have the tools and the resources that they need in order to remain permanently housed. So we look at who's going to return to our system at 6 months, 12 months, and 24 months. And we need to understand, how do we best equip people so that we don't see them back in our system. We develop a lot of relationships with those that we serve, but ideally the circumstances under which we would see them again are not going to be a return to homelessness. And then we also, as part of multiple different aspects of these strategies, we want to examine how we can increase income. That would be both employment and non-employment income. So how can we help persons to get jobs and keep jobs? How can we help persons to access mainstream benefits, whether that be SSI, SSDI, food stamps, or other resources that might be available to them? I can share with you some of the things that we're currently working on to address these strategies, but I didn't want to do just a presentation for the entire duration of the meeting, and this is where I'd really like to kind of open things up and get some input. So I'll share a couple of things that we're currently working on, but then I'd like us to engage in some conversations about what else that we might like to pursue. And that could be from an existing member or someone who's just visiting or someone who intends to join. Input is valuable whether you are a member on paper or not. So some of the things that we're currently doing, we are in the process of revising our common assessment tool for coordinated entry. That's what helps us understand acuity and needs. And so we've had concerns, like other communities have, about the VI-SPID app and its effectiveness. And so what we're hoping to gain from this is several things. We're hoping to gain more insight into risk factors associated with someone's homelessness originating. And we're hoping to get things like a better understanding of their needs, a more accurate reading of acuity, so we can make sure that they are paired with the correct programs. Not only does that help them to be successful now, but understanding from the front end what their needs are, we're also going to do things like ensure that they have a more positive exit from programs and that they are less likely to return. We have recently expanded our street outreach efforts as a strategy to try to reduce the amount of time that persons experience homelessness by assertively engaging them and not expecting people to come into an office in order to initiate services. We're working right now on a couple of different strategies to expand access to case management, which can be something that might help to divert people, that might help individuals who are in a literal homeless situation but maybe not yet have access to a resource for housing, but also that might help us transition people from our existing programs if maybe they no longer require an intensive amount of support. So we just closed a RFP for an intensive case management program and are in the process of getting that approved by council, but should soon be able to announce some additional case management supports. Also working with one of our internal divisions that might have a little bit of staffing that they can devote to helping provide some expanded case management. One of the things that I think is a common misconception is that case management is just widely available to everyone. where those of us that do this work know that usually it is trying to identify if somebody meets a certain subpopulation, if they have an insurance provider that might offer that service. We're trying to find ways to screen them in. It's not something that we can always locate for everyone in our community who might benefit from it. We've also been working over several months, and many of you in the room have been a part of this process, to develop an onboarding curriculum for frontline staff. That might be street outreach workers, shelter case managers, or housing case managers. But ultimately that platform will give information to people to help them learn a lot of our processes, to help them with getting some baseline skills in different areas. Maybe that's trauma-informed care, motivational interviewing, harm reduction. The ideal being that if we help invest in our frontline staff, we're going to have better outcomes while we are working with individuals, and that clients are going to be better prepared as they exit programming and less likely to return to our system. We're also working on trying to reduce the length of time that persons experience homelessness by funding a landlord engagement program. That RFP is active now and closes at the start of May. And that puts funding in the hands of an organization to help us recruit and engage landlords. There's a lot of flexibility in that RFP for proposers to present a plan of how they might get there. But we understand that even those that have rental assistance or vouchers available, we've seen probably a 200% or more increase in the length of time that folks are homeless between enrollment and move-in in the last 5 years. So this is something that's becoming increasingly challenging. It was a challenge before the pandemic. With increases that we've seen in rents in subsequent years, it's even more challenging. A lot of our existing housing providers have seen landlords steadily drop out of participating in programs, and the ability to find affordable units and landlords willing to work with us, that pool is shrinking. So we need to do something to expand it. We're also beginning to look at different ways that we can tap into the Lexington Homelessness Fund, which operates off of donations, to try to find needs that we can meet in the community. As we closed our seasonal resources like the Hope Village temporary shelter, we used some of those funds to help pay deposits and initial rent for households that had income, to try to make sure that there were fewer persons that would be displaced when those seasonal resources came to a close. But I wanted to open this up and kind of just help people to think about the kinds of strategies that we need to be focused on throughout each year. Obviously we write about it each year in our application, but we don't want it to be a once a year. We want it to be an all year, every year kind of effort. So I wanted to open the floor to see if anybody had any discussion, thoughts, suggestions on how we might improve or more formalize some of our strategies.
With none of that, would you be able to provide us with copies of these slides? Because you've just given us a ton of information in a very short amount of time, and that would be very helpful if you could have those screenshots of that presentation.
I had a question about I forget what it was called, some people can't go straight into, they're not ready to go right into housing, so you have alternate housing options for those particular population? Like, I was thinking, like, is this people that are like using substances can't go into the shelters? Because they won't accept people that are
It could be, I think about several populations. For example, right now, LFUCG also has an RFP out for a shelter study that is for a contractor to come in and recommend some models or best practices. We recognize that our existing shelter system has challenges and gaps. For example, we currently lack a shelter that can accommodate couples that don't have children. We lack shelters that can accommodate pets who are not service animals. I think our only shelter that's presently able to really do that on a large scale is Greenhouse 17. We see these challenges impact who does access shelter. For example, during our most recent point in time count, probably about half of the individuals that we identified unsheltered were a part of multiple member households. So we know that things like not having a shelter where both men and women can go, and not only just both go, but if we go to the Hope Village, we have separate sleeping quarters for men and women, and so even though both could present and be served, for some people that having to separate is a barrier. So this is something that we acknowledge. There's a lot of populations, a lot of particular issues that might not always be a good fit for shelter. And if someone's not going to access shelter, we shouldn't force them to go through that pathway. But how can we change gears and maybe focus on the permanent housing pathway for them?
So then what does that mean? So permanent housing, then you have some kind of special option that would help them because they have the special circumstances?
So, I mean,
to
technically,
get them directly into some kind of single house?
So our coordinated entry system operates in a way where anyone can gain access to our permanent housing programs regardless of whether they are on the streets or coming through shelter. There's no preference for being in shelter. But it could be that we see a particular need that we could develop programming that addresses a certain need. But I think it's something we have to be mindful where we're not necessarily creating an unfair or unjust system that's giving preference to one population and giving them a more ideal option. But if it's done in the right way, I think we can consider that we might need to have some alternatives available.
And without being educated about it, but I've heard people say that people with families or with children are prioritized and things like that. And I think that what about the people that are single? They're not prioritized then? Like you were saying, unfair.
I would say that's not necessarily the case. Like for winter, we tried to develop several different layers of solutions. So for example, we had the temporary shelter as kind of the main kind of resource for the largest amount of people, and that was focused on adults, men and women. But we acknowledged that, for example, there were some persons that might not be able to reside there. For example, sometimes there were certain challenges. We had a site that required us to lay gravel, and that wasn't going to be a good fit for someone who maybe is in a wheelchair and can't necessarily navigate that physical environment. So we did have a small scale program that worked specifically with individuals that were elderly and disabled that might not be able to physically access the temporary shelter. And then Community Action Council, we gave some funding to expand their emergency family housing program, knowing that it can be difficult when there are limited family rooms and you're not necessarily trying to find shelter for one or two individuals. It might be a larger family. We wanted them to have some funding for hotels available on an emergency basis. So I don't personally think that we across the board have a preference for families with children, but I do acknowledge that, for example, when I go out and try to solicit donations or assistance or anything from the community, oftentimes there are certain populations that do get a little bit warmer reception. Anytime that we're working with children or sometimes populations like veterans, you might get more community support. I can definitely understand how someone would feel if they're in the position of being a single individual. It might feel as if there are certain populations that are more prioritized. Thinking through the different strategies that we are tasked with working with, does anybody have any suggestions, and it can be on any of these strategies, things that we would like to throw out as things for this group to be examining? That could be models, it could be areas to prioritize. Sometimes it's starting with what the question or the problem is before we actually know what the solution looks like.
Could you talk more about the case management? Like I thought when people stay at the Hope Center or at Salvation Army, they're receiving case management. Is that not necessarily the case? Or like, and I don't mean to call them out, but I'm just thinking those are shelters. Catholic Action is Catholic Action Center too, I thought that they would receive
So
case management.
with Catholic Action Center, they largely operate with volunteers. They don't have a lot of paid staff, so they typically haven't offered formal case management at the Catholic Action Center, to my knowledge. When they have, it's been partnering with some kind of volunteers or another organization typically to provide that. And as far as our other shelters go, I'm definitely going to let Amber chime in as one of our shelter providers. Even though their program is different, Marty and Community Action Council operate our emergency family housing program. I think one of the things is it can be a challenge in a large congregate shelter to really give intensive case management to every person that is accessing shelter. When we're talking about a shelter like the Salvation Army, they probably have something like 5 case managers, and they might have 100 or more persons staying at their shelter. So I think it's a matter of the quality of the case management that can truly be delivered, and sometimes too, shelter staff can kind of be seen as someone who's not necessarily easily identified as a support. Some people are not happy to be in shelter, and so they might not be super enthusiastic about engaging. But I think our shelter providers might be able to give some insights into some of the challenges.
Yes, and it is what Jeff mentioned, his numbers. We have 2 case managers, 3 if you count our veterans case manager who only works with veterans. Other than him, there are 2 for about, any given night, 120 to 170 men. And it is hard to prioritize that. Maybe the men that need the most intensive case management are the men that are least likely to come knocking on a caseworker's door, So sometimes it's up to staff to, front desk or myself, somebody to notice that a little quiet guy in the crowd, he really needs all the case management. And people that are more, a little bit more self-sufficient, sometimes we just have to say to them, here's the phone numbers and what you need to do, but they can't sit down and spend, 2 hours with that guy a day or an hour with that guy. You have to prioritize and see. So, yeah, we have case managers, but it's a whole process of seeing what they need and who can do what. And we're recently talking about, some volunteers that are qualified and have experience helping us with clients applying for Medicaid on the computer, helping them with that. So that would take, free up some time for our case managers. So, but that's, kind of the way it looks over there. And I try to give people the real, when I meet with them when they come in, I try to tell them the realistic view here and identify those that.
And Amber mentioned volunteers. One of the things that we mentioned that we're currently working on is that onboarding curriculum for frontline staff. When we engaged that team in selecting a learning management system, kind of the course shell for everything to live in, we purchased a package that's going to give us a high number of user licenses, with me having the thought that at some point we could potentially use that to engage folks who are not necessarily just the paid frontline staff, but maybe we can engage those that do want to help and give them some education and how they can work with individuals and provide some of those supports. Marty, did you have anything to add? And obviously, Janice, you have a background on having operated shelter. Any thoughts from you all?
Area of emergency family housing program is a little different just because it is non-congregate and not the size that the Hope Center, Salvation Army are. So they have the challenges with like she was talking about, it's not as great or aren't necessarily an issue with them. I think when we are providing case management, we're working with families, mostly families with children, and so those can be a little more complicated than it is working with just individuals or couples. There's usually some dynamics that come into play, usually some surprises that they don't always share. So there's that part of things, and then we are able to assist. We also have to weigh the options as far as if they have income, we can assist them in finding a place and maybe assist them with security deposit and first month's rent, but then ongoing case management and whether or not they need that, are they going to be able to sustain that, or is it better to help them try to obtain some type of referral, maybe through coordinated entry, But then there's the timing of that and how long they might take before they can actually get a referral, and there's turnover, and we have a limited number of slots, and so we also have a wait list, and so we're trying to weigh all that and balance all that in terms of how, you know, decisions we make and how we assist those families can be a little complicated. And it is, you know, so, you know, I guess that would be a difference between what we do and the Hope Center and some of the challenges they face.
And others can comment too. I know we have several folks who do case management outside of a shelter environment.
Yeah, that's when you said that, I wasn't aware. I thought there was Vista and your Mountain Comp, right? And I just thought there was all this case management around. And even people that are receiving funding for homeless programs are also providing. So I just didn't realize you said it was really a problem. Finding people
A lot of
appropriate.
the case management that we're funded for example, through the COC program, that's specifically for the participants in that housing program. They can do some outreach to help identify clients that might be eligible, to help them gain access to the coordinated entry list, but they can't necessarily do ongoing case management for someone who's not in their program. That's not an allowable cost. And I think, you know, for our mental health care centers, sometimes they're going to require that someone go through the process of becoming a client of the organization. So maybe there's a time frame barrier, things like insurance and having to do an intake before you're actually sitting in front of a case manager.
And I think New Vista and Mountain Comp do a great job of case management. We've been working with Eastern State Hospital, I think, pretty well, and we've been trying for the last few years to help them connect from discharge at Eastern State to the homeless shelter. That it's so hard for them to communicate with someone staying at the homeless shelter about appointments and all that. We've tried several different ways, but it's still hard because most of those guys don't have phones. And our two case managers and I, you know, try to track the guy down and give him his appointments, but you can see how it gets kind of tedious. But we try to because they do a good job if they can follow up with the guy, find them.
Another barrier when it comes to like mental health care organizations providing case management as a service, if there's Medicaid billing that's involved, something like targeted case management generally is only approved a few months at a time and has to be continually recertified that need still exists. So I think there is a lot of misunderstanding and misconception just about how easy it is to access. That's why we're really looking at some strategies that we can increase that. And I'm open to those ideas if anyone has a thought about how we can get to that goal.
I just wonder, like, is there a stigma? You said a lot of these people won't, they're the least likely, the ones that might need it most, the least likely that are going to step forward and ask for it. Is there a stigma with is there an alternative to case management that's like not termed case management, but like someone's there to help kind of do similar stuff, but like not necessarily as formal case management?
I don't think it's the stigma as once they're in the shelter. I don't think it's the stigma. I think it's the men that are severely mentally ill or just have a personality that's very quiet. And you're in this large number of men, and a lot of them are really loud. You know what I mean? They're a lot. Just something as simple as having kind of isolating. It's not going to come to your door necessarily. You're the squeaky wheel, that sort of thing. We try to not. It's just true. I mean, we try to find.
That's what intimidates a lot of people we've tried to work with. They don't want to go to the shelter. That's what intimidates them, I guess.
Yeah, nobody really wants to be there. We don't expect that they want to be there, and I think we're all trying to find the guys that aren't speaking out. We talked about one today who really need the help, but we also need to help the guys that want the help, I don't know. I hadn't really thought about the stigma issue. I think once they're in the shelter, I don't know if that's such an issue. Maybe before they come in, it's probably getting over that hump of stigma to get in the shelter probably exists for sure.
How many people in your shelter don't have medical insurance or state medical card? Is that common?
It's common, but not nearly as common as it used to be. I mean, less than half, wouldn't you think?
That's probably accurate.
Less than half.
Have you ever contacted DCBS to see if they would send somebody once a week to work with those individuals?
We've talked. Janice?
They're pretty short-handed, it appears.
Yeah. That's why we're actively talking to some volunteers right now. It's actually, I'd like for it to grow, but it's a husband and wife who have experience that have the time to volunteer. So there's nothing against, just someone like that helping these people, helping them
Right.
if they sign, And so we want to address it as.
But I would think Frankfurt would send somebody
Yeah, you would.
if you told them there was a need.
They're short-handed too.
Yeah.
My old boss, when I worked at the county attorney's office, he sent me out all the time. Go here, go there.
Does he still send people out?
Do what?
I said, does he still send people out?
Well, he's not there anymore, so he retired. But yeah, and it was just people calling in saying, we need somebody to come talk to our, fathers on paternity or whatever.
Yeah.
And I going to other counties training.
Wow.
So, it was just a matter of getting to the right person
Right.
to get the help sent out.
Mm-hmm.
I know we've gotten the response before that people are short-handed, that they don't have the capacity, but that doesn't prevent me from asking again, so I jotted that down.
Right.
We'll see, we'll try again.
Well, and I'll try to find out in Frankfurt who you need to talk to. I used to have some pull up there years ago, but I retired, so
You never know.
I don't know anybody.
And also to your point, there are folks that aren't labeled as case managers. We have peer support specialists. And so that's something too that we could always consider too. Maybe another pathway is not just expanding case management, but also expanding peer support.
Are those people that have kind of experienced homelessness, so they?
Yeah, and there's peer supports that have lived experience of homelessness, of substance use, of mental health issues. We also tend to, most of our street outreach staff are going to be folks that have lived experience of one or more of those issues. But that could be another strategy of, maybe it might be easier to come up with a little bit of funding for peer support than it would be at times for case management.
Well, and I've also noticed that now we're into the post-COVID era. There's a lot less of the ease of like getting things done for Social Security. They have to go back to the office now instead of being able to do things remotely. Same thing with Medicaid. A lot of it. So my experience and what I'm doing is finding that people just need help with the navigation through the system, because it's like, well, it was this way last year and now it's not, and what do I do? Same thing with, even getting a housing voucher. It's not so much, they just need to know, somebody's going to give them that moment to sit down and say, here's the paperwork you need to do. I've even taken some of our consumers to a Social Security office and said, take a number and, they'll help you, because they can't call anymore. Same thing with birth certificates online. And it's just a lot of, giving them that hand.
You mentioned.
And the Social Security thing, they just make it so difficult online.
They do.
Where you apply. Then you have to have this number sent to you. So if you don't have an address, and you've got to use that number to go back in to get what you need.
Well, I did it for myself firsthand, and I actually, the only way I got things done was I had to create an account, a Social Security account online, and that way, I am that presence in their system to be able to get a new Social Security card, because mine was written on proprietary. So.
I think the real problem is there's just not enough case managers, and probably will never be able to afford it, because the people like that Amber's working with and a lot of people working, they're time consuming because they have multiple issues to work through. And I don't know, even when you get through the multiple issues, I know you have somebody new on housing, that's a whole nother ballgame. So you're fighting the two battles, but there's just not enough resources, and I don't know if you have more of an effort to target. Do you target the long-term person that's been there forever, or do you target the short-term people who don't need as much help?
Well, maybe I'm an albatross, but I have found that most of the people, in fact, not most, all the people I've helped, if I give them, I say, you need to fill this out, get it back to me, or get it to like Lexington Housing, they will do it. As long as they have a cell phone, or I had one lady who sent me all her paperwork by taking pictures on her phone and sending it to me so I could print it up. Perfect. So there's ways of getting around it, but I've found, my experience has been, there's been great pride taken in a lot of people who want to help themselves. And, so it's just a matter of making sure to get them what they need to be able to help you help them. It's really been a really workable situation for me.
Yeah, what I've found unintentionally is, because when it's not business hours, the clients come to the Hope Center, in the middle of the night or weekends, they're given an intake form. And we've sort of taught the guys that work the front desk, if they say, oh, I forgot my glasses or blah, blah, blah. A lot of people don't want to say I can't read or write, but lots of people cannot read or write.
Yeah.
And so, I'm happy to fill it out with them, and they are too. It takes a lot more time.
Yeah.
And they don't have phones either. So those guys without phones and who can't read and write, it's a longer session.
Yeah.
I don't want to sound, this is kind of depressing, because I think we're doing better as a community. This is much better than it was. I think we're going forward. I don't want anybody to leave depressed.
I'll be honest, looking at our point in time count numbers, overall, we only had an overall increase of 10 persons from last year. And I don't mean to celebrate the number of persons that are experiencing homelessness, but that does tell me is in the current climate, if we are at least keeping things steady, ultimately I want us to trend downward, but even keeping things steady, I think acknowledges a lot of the good that is occurring in our system and in our community. We just have to continue to find things that we can add to that. Not to end this conversation, but I just wanted to give a space before we would move on. Is there any thought around any of our other strategies that we emphasize? Thoughts about increasing income, earned or unearned, other things that we can be doing to help prepare people as they exit so they don't return?
Can I go back to reduce the number of first time?
Yeah.
Or are we going in order?
Take another.
You go in order.
I had a simple question. I know a lot of times there are expungement cases or clinics for folks with criminal backgrounds. Is that being done at all to help them get their record clean so they can go out and be more employable?
Yeah, so the city is offering a number of expungement clinics now. So that's something that we can try to make sure information's reaching our members through our mailing list to know when those opportunities are available. But that also wouldn't preclude us from looking at trying to expand that effort. But I know that's been a focus of the past couple of years, has been really making that more accessible.
And all the men that go through our recovery program are offered assistance with that as well.
Passing now, if that would increase things. Sorry, I was saying, I wonder if with House Bill 5, changes, legislation, things, if expungement and things like that would need to happen more.
It's possible. We definitely are kind of waiting to see what's going to happen.
Right.
Obviously, there was not an emergency clause which put that into effect immediately, but we know it's expected around July to be implemented. Of course, we're kind of keeping eyes on what's happening in Grants Pass, Oregon, but we know that even that case is probably going to take several months to play out. And it may or may not have an impact on something like House Bill 5. So we do have to face the reality that more of the folks that we work with might be facing criminal charges just for sleeping outdoors.
Well, last year, I remember there was a company that had an expungement hearing, and they were taking the first 50 in the door. Well, they had over 250 people show up. So, and they had to turn away 200 people.
Yeah, I know some of our members, like Passport, recently offered an expungement clinic and fair at one of their centers, and I do know that they do get
and Goodwill
quite a
does it
turnout.
all the time.
Yeah.
And your high functioning, someone that's really high functioning can do it themselves when guided towards the directions. We do that with a lot of our guys.
Friend of the Court used to have documents that you could just fill in the blank. I don't know if they still do.
There was no automated system online at one point. It's become hard to find for some reason. I don't know if folks thought it became more difficult, but it is a fairly simple form. You're right, I think a sophisticated person. But if you're completely unsophisticated, you definitely need somebody to walk you through it.
Do you know who maintained the automated system?
I don't. Like I said, they may not anymore.
Yeah.
The last time I came across it was before they added the exceptions for the felonies, for the nonviolent felonies. So that may have been why they dropped it, because it became a little more complex.
In addition to the expungement clinics, so some of the Medicaid, you mentioned Passport does the pop-up clinics, but several of the Medicaid MCOs have added benefit. So if an individual has a particular managed care organization, they can call their member services and get connected to their case management that way. Some offer funding or supports or transportation and different things related to expungement too.
Yeah, and a lot of the passport and different healthcare do things like that, but I don't know. I wish there was. I'd like to have it all emailed to me. Like we're all doing this now.
I mean, that's definitely something we can take as a
Yeah.
request and try to make sure that we are able to maximize the communication, the ease of accessing that. These are the ideals that I want to have so that, I'm not always going to get a yes, but I can go and ask and be an annoyance to people
Yeah.
until they give me what I want.
Wasn't it somebody with passport that came to the board meeting and said we're putting on this expungement clinic? And I forget who it was.
Yeah, it's Shannon Derrick. I think we shared that opportunity on our mailing list after the meeting. Actually, she sent me an electronic version after I'd already sent out a scan. I was very eager.
And the only other thing I wanted, I'm sorry?
I'm assuming that Jeff is aware and will share the information, but just in case, the next expungement clinic for the city and the library is going to be the 30th.
Okay.
At the library?
No, it's at the, what do they call Rupp Arena these days? The Lexington Center, the convention center? Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
an input on the increased income. Have you ever thought about reaching out to the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, the Lexington office to?
They're technically a member.
When I first
But
started,
what I see is, and I think, part of it is we have to do a better job of making our work accessible. That's why I'm trying to do things like I'm doing today, is to make it easier for folks to participate. It can be kind of intimidating. I think sometimes people feel like it's a core group of people who do this, who know all the acronyms, and then they feel like the outsider, or maybe they feel like we're going to be focusing on our business and it's not going to be something that benefits them. So we have to make it attractive, but we have a lot of members who are formally a member, but we may not see a lot or talk to a lot.
Sometimes people leave, and when they leave, the ball just gets dropped.
You can lose momentum when someone leaves. So, but definitely, if you have like a contact that your organization has had a positive experience with, share that with me, and we can try to find ways to better engage them. And that's part of what we're doing too. It's also just looking at, sometimes it's not that we have an ideal to formally develop a strategy for something, but maybe it's just as simple as figuring out who is not present or not active and how can we engage them.
Do you have insight into what happened with the landlords that you said you've lost the percentage of landlords that will accept? What is it? Is it the population that causes problems, or what is that?
Sometimes, but to be honest, a lot of it has to do with the affordable housing landscape more broadly, and that, for one thing, a lot of our assistance programs are going to be limited in the amount of rent that they can pay. And post-COVID, a lot of landlords have seen that they can get much higher rents from renting to just an average individual who doesn't come with any kind of requirements of a voucher or rental assistance. So that can definitely be a factor. And just the overall vacancy rates are really low. During the source of income discrimination ban conversation in council, we heard from landlords who shared stories about a unit that they would have in the past received a handful of applications for. They're going to see double, maybe triple digit applications for now. And so part of it's just competition in locating units, and sometimes people can pay more than what our programs or our clients can pay.
That actually leads to a question. I wasn't sure if this would be considered a strategy or not, and that is working on a strategy for finding more inventory for low-income permanent housing. Because the numbers that just came out recently is like over 206,000 for the state, and I forgot what the number was for Fayette County, but it's still like a lot. That we just don't have enough housing for people who would like to get a voucher or some other, get into permanent or low income housing, there's nothing there.
Long term, I would love to see a tool that can do almost like lifetime inventory to help pair people with available units. We're pursuing some other things as we work toward that, kind of alongside that effort, just because the feedback that I've gotten from some partners who have actually taken that step is that it's a very time-consuming process, and it's not something that we're going to have developed quickly. But that is definitely part of a long-term
Well,
goal.
then you gotta get the landlords to participate in that.
So your request for proposal on the landlord engagement program, can you say more about what that involves actually?
Yeah, I to be honest, I really left a lot of flexibility in that RFP for proposers to tell me what strategies that they think would be the most effective. I gave some examples of some things that other communities have done or that we have done in some level in the past. Sometimes that is offering incentives just for landlords to sign up to participate. Sometimes it is things like double security deposits to give a little reassurance if there are issues with the tenant. In the past, there's been some discussions around landlord mitigation funds that a landlord might be able to tap into if they did accept a tenant and something negative transpired that financially impacted them. But that can also be things like holding forums and active outreach to landlords to share education with them about things like the supports that come along with that tenant or the success of our programs. I had someone share some ideas with me the other day about maybe sometimes the paperwork that a landlord has to do in association with the program can be a barrier. So maybe we could have someone who helps the landlord to completely navigate that paperwork to make it easier and reduce that barrier. There's a variety of different things that could be part of that strategy. So the first time I put the RFP out, I got no responses. So did a little bit of work while it was closed to go back and shop it around to people who I think would do well in that area. Reissued it with some people telling me that they are seriously considering putting in their application, and I'm waiting to see what we get. I also, knowing that we have a little bit more money to work with right now, I didn't set a dollar amount on that RFP so that someone can tell me what is it going to take to be effective, and then I can always try to scale it to meet the budget that we have available. But I didn't. Sometimes when you put a dollar amount in an RFP, people are going to write to that dollar amount, and it's not necessarily going to reflect a better program. It's just going to reflect, we want all the money that's available. But there's a lot of flexibility in that. It's open through May 3rd. It can be found on the city's Ion Wave platform. I want to say it's RFP 30-2024. I've sent it out through the mailing list. I'm glad to share information if somebody would like that information. Because we do have just a couple of brief updates that I want to close out with. Want to give a final opportunity. I know we've talked about some strategizing. I think there's some good initial conversation. I would love for us to continue that work in advocacy. Definitely, if you come across ideas, specific problems or gaps that you want us to engage in conversation in, I would love to receive some of that so that I can develop agendas in advance. Put some items together and make sure that it's not just our office or a handful of members that are generating that conversation. Definitely feel free to reach out to me and say, hey, I've had this idea, I thought maybe we could talk about it as a group. I would love to receive that. For now, I'm going to kind of cap this and just ask, is there any general questions about the continuum of care, our work, our meetings, anything that I can answer or speak to that might help give more clarity or make our work more accessible to you? And don't be afraid to speak. I definitely don't think there is such a thing as a dumb question or a bad question.
I appreciate you talking about those different meetings, because when I first started coming, it was like, oh, we got another one? Oh, okay, there's another one? It was like, I just went to one. It was like.
Yeah, we are a meeting group, and so I think it does help to have
But
some
they're
context.
complicated things,
Sometimes,
so it can't
sometimes
be
I
all-
see someone at a particular meeting, and I think, I'd really love to see you at this other meeting that I think is really more in your wheelhouse. So I think us continually messaging what these committees do is going to be a major focus for us in terms of recruiting new folks.
Jeff, so I have access to HMIS and I'm with Nathaniel Mission, and I have seen cases where people, I would love to get them into the continuum of care, but I don't necessarily have the support that I need. I'm one person trying to do all this case management, and even though we had a volunteer that was studying to be in this field and was supposed to be designated to me, we are shorthanded in other areas. So that person has to go to those areas and I don't have help. I think, I'm not sure if you're aware of like the senior employment program and other programs. There could be a program developed to kind of mimic that, to where people that are going into housing, as far as you're talking about like gaining employment, that could help a lot of us really that are using volunteers. And I have even my client base who comes in and, what do you need help with? Can I help you with this? Can I help you with that? And some of them have really expressed that they would like to get paid, and I'd love to pay them. But I can't necessarily do that because we don't have the funding. So that might be a place to look at. In that situation, what is there a way for me to connect with someone else when I do see someone that looks like they're high at risk, they are about to be evicted or etc., and I feel like someone else could better handle this than myself, not because I don't want to, but because I don't necessarily have the capability at that moment? Do you know?
So some of that I can answer, some of it I can't. In terms of like gaining access to like our coordinated entry system, like having the ability to assess and put somebody into HMIS so that they appear on our by name list and could be referred to housing. If you don't have the capacity to do that yourself, usually kind of where I start is what is that individual situation? Where are they currently staying? If they're unsheltered, trying to connect them with one of our street outreach teams. If they're in shelter, trying to see if you can get them connected with case management within the shelter. And oftentimes when I have that call or that contact, I'm not going to rely solely just on the individual taking my word and going to the case manager at the shelter. I'm going to reach out, and Amber knows this firsthand. I'm going to be annoyed, and I'm going to send an email, and I'm going to say, hey, this person expressed, can you all try to follow up on that? So that way I'm following two pathways, letting the individual have that information, alerting the staff, trying to make sure they connect. It can be looking to see if they're working with any other organizations. If they have Medicaid, do they have an MCO that offers any kind of case management? Some of those organizations do some pretty intensive case management because they consider it a benefit. It's going to be a little bit harder necessarily when it's just those situations of this person's about to be evicted. I think most of us are going to be familiar after some time in this work of, Community and Resident Services has an emergency financial assistance program. Their number is 85933. But I don't necessarily have a source that I can tell you of dedicated case management. I'm working on that. I've got a couple different things that I'm trying to pursue with case management, one related to the RFP that we released, and then I am working with another division within the city that has some small scale capacity that when I receive those calls that I might have somewhere that I can refer them to as a handoff where my office can't do support services. That maybe there is somebody that if we could just connect with the case manager, maybe that prevents them from entering homelessness. So hopefully I'll have more to share in the future. Right now at this moment, I don't have a good resource that's going to meet every need around that kind of supportive service.
Obviously, and I understand that this is multiple layers and a lot of different prongs. My concern is when you find people that I've had clients express to me that they're handicapped, so certain shelters are not able to accept them due to their capacity, or they're living in their car, or for example, today I had a call from a gentleman who's 60 plus years old, had a partial amputation, doesn't have any income because doesn't qualify for disability because he can technically walk, and is about to be on the street. And it's, how do I connect him, or where do I find a place for him? Because not every place that I know of is going to be a good fit for him. And I also don't want him to end up being arrested, no fault of his own, or not have his insulin because he's also diabetic. And these are all things that, like, I would love to partner with someone else to be able to say, how do we look at this, or
and that's where we need more partners at the table, so we have a stronger and more robust system that can do that. Some initial thoughts, and my office is willing to serve as a resource navigation hub and let you know what we are aware of. Just hearing what you had to say, one thought is connecting him with the senior center. They do have some case management. They also have some financial resources. You mentioned, some disabling conditions, connecting them with Independence Place. You mentioned things like trying to navigate how he's going to maintain his insulin. Sounds like there's some medicalized needs. Our community paramedicine team might be someone that can be another support to that individual. Sometimes it's just us having those opportunities to dialogue like this and think through some of those ideals or potential pathways. But I think we definitely need more of them, and that's where that push to get additional partners at the table comes from. But in the meantime, you're always welcome to reach out to us. We could also, think about, is there easier ways than just an email that we can communicate about resources or questions that we have? Maybe there's a platform or a tool that we would want to use to communicate. Definitely there's things that we can do to help each other identify those resources that we do have.
I have a question. Back in my United Way days, we started up the 211, and I really don't know how many folks are using it these days. I don't know, 211, are you all familiar with it? Mm-hmm. Where you just dial, you can say, here's the situation, and they'll tell you what agencies. I just didn't know how robust that still was.
I'm not certain. I know I refer to 211, especially when it comes to things like financial assistance resources. I give an individual contacting me the several things that I'm aware of, and then say, you might also want to contact the United Way and see what resources that they have. And I know a lot of folks are accessing their waypoint centers or using their kiosks to gain information. Also, myky.info went statewide a while back, and they're it's kind of an app, it's kind of a website. It works as both, and that's been another tool that's really helpful on identifying resources.
So you don't mind. 211, 311,
211.
211 is United Way. 311 is Lex Call with the city.
They just recently did a big get to know everybody meeting at the Eastside Library, and I was at that. They've started something called Connect, KYNECT, where they're even asking organizations and partners to onboard to their directory. It's kind of a live where people can call them and they have more of a database, and they're actually offering, I think, like $100 sign-on for onboarding with them. So that's another option. Yeah, they're out there, and I think they're trying really hard to expand what they've had already, because I think, things like that people tend to forget, or it becomes kind of stale in people's minds, and so they're trying to re-robust that whole program.
In the interest of time, I'm going to move us through the last couple of agenda items that we have. I'll stick around in case there's any questions or conversations that we need to continue to have. So real quick on our continuing business, Marissa has been on vacation this week and last week. We are going to be working to go ahead and finalize when she returns our next lived engagement activity, lived experience engagement activity. So we'll be able to share some information about that very soon. And regarding program standards, I just want to remind folks that we are due to have a review of our emergency shelter standards. That date is May 22nd. And we will, within the next week or so, go ahead and send out the details of the meeting space, send out the current draft of those standards so folks have an opportunity to review and come to the meeting prepared with anything additional that they would like us to review. And now, kind of just changing gears, is there any announcements or public sharing? Or are folks just ready to get out the door? As a reminder, our next meeting will be on June 26th. We'll be here again at the Don Ball Campus Center at 1:30 p.m. And I'll go ahead and call us adjourned. But like I said, I'll stick around if there's anybody that would like to continue on one of these conversations after the meeting.